And we're back, and it's the very last bit of Passover too. So to those of you all doing Passover things, hopefully you've had a very good Passover and you're tired of matzah and you're ready to get back into consuming yeast. I myself am consuming yeast right here. This is you can't really see it. This is a Silver City Brewery. We're not sponsored by them, but they're very good. They do a craft malt liquor, which, by the way, is actually quite good. It's an old style malt liquor, like from the 40s, not the crappy shit you get in a corner store. So I'm very much enjoying my yeast. It's been a crazy week, but it's cool to be here. We have a really fun topic today: Elijah and the Prophets of Baal, which is just, it's one of the best stories from the Bible. It's so fun and brutal and over the top and all the things you kind of want, particularly in an Old Testament or Hebrew Bible story. You want some extremity, and there's some extremity happening. Elliott joins us again. Elliott, hopefully you're doing well. Hopefully
I'm doing well, yeah.
yeah,
No, it's a very metal story at the end of the day, and
metal.
Baal, Elijah, and this story does actually play a pretty big role in the atheism community, right? In the early 2000s, like this was a real beloved hobby horse for the Atheism Plus crowd. I remember watching those videos when I was going on a couple year atheism sprint for myself, all that stuff. So I don't say phase, because phase is really condescending to your previous self, right? It's like,
Right.
no, sometimes you believe shit at different times, and it's okay
Yeah,
to change your mind,
it's
right?
okay to
Like, it's
change your
not like
mind.
I was trying it on for size, right? It
Yeah.
just turns out in retrospect it didn't fit me, but I was gonna wear the shoe, and I was like, you know what, fuck these shoes, I'm out of here.
Fuck your couch. Anyhow, that's what went through my mind. Rick James. Yeah, so I guess I don't want to assume. We know what happens when you assume. I think we'll just give like a quick, and I know it's hard for me to be quick about anything, but I'll try to give both of us will just give a quick overview of like what the story is, because we don't want to assume that people necessarily know this story, because if you don't know it, you should look into it regardless of your religious background. It's just a great story, first and foremost. And regardless of your sort of theological stance about anything, I do think, like all great stories, that the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal has a lot to tell us about, like our current cultural moment. As cringe as that is to say, I do think it's true, and I do think that there's a ton of strategy in it. There's an implied strategy behind what Elijah is doing that is very effective. And even if fire doesn't come down from heaven and burn up a burnt offering in front of you, it likely will not. I do think his approach works, and it works incredibly well. And the fact that it is Elijah versus the prophets of Baal and Asherah, but those get kind of confused and forgotten at some point. But Baal in particular, the status of Baal and what Baal represents also has a lot of, let's say, mythic resonance with what we're dealing with in our culture today. So with that, let's just jump in. Elliott, you want to start with or do you want me to give the general overview? I've reread it very recently, so
Yeah, feel free to give the
okay.
general overview. Yeah, and then we'll jump in from there.
We'll do our I guess we'll first and foremost say that neither of us are biblical scholars. So somebody out there who has a firm grounding in that we will probably make some minor errors. Sorry.
I'm certainly not a Old Testament biblical scholar.
Neither am I. We are both fairly intelligent people. I actually did look at I looked at the story here, 1 Kings 18 in Hebrew, with the caveat that I was using a lexicon because my Hebrew is lo tov, and that probably wasn't even correct. It's not good. So I like know some Hebrew words and some things like that, and I can sort of spell or sound it out with the vowel points. That's the extent of my Hebrew. So I'm using interlinear Bible. So I am not a Torah scholar. I am not an expert in biblical Hebrew. I am so.
But one thing I am seeing here that if you happened to have looked up, which would be really convenient, is this word prophet, because I get a good sense of what it means on the Israeli side, right? On the Elijah side, but like I'm not actually 100% sure what all these prophets are doing, right, on the side of Baal in terms of
Yeah.
prophets, right? Because in the Judeo-Christian thing, you're thinking, nah, there's pretty much one prophet at a time, right? Like a sort of Mormon, there is a prophet, right? Like it's
No,
not.
because let's we're jumping around. Let's do it outliners,
Yeah.
and
But
then
I
we'll
do
do
want to
the
bring up that point at some
yes.
point. So,
Essentially,
yep.
what you have here is you have a Lutheran and an occult and a whatever you identify as. I don't want to put the identity on you, Elliot. An
No,
occultist,
hermeticist. They're called
hermeticist.
hermeticists.
Yeah,
That's
occultist has a
yeah.
very negative connotation. A hermeticist and a Lutheran doing a, a Bible study, but it'll be more exciting than that, I promise. Okay, so this is a great story. It's very metal, as Elliot said. I'm gonna gloss over some things, and we're gonna jump around. That's how we do. We wander. Okay, so there is a king, and his name is Ahab, and Ahab's bad. Okay, Ahab does not worship. Well, we might have Jewish viewers, so he does not worship the Lord, capital Lord, as in the name that you shouldn't say aloud. So he doesn't worship the true God.
It starts with a Y and ends with an A.
Starts with a Y. Yeah, that one. Because I always have to remind myself, you might be a mixed company, so please be appropriate. Yes, we will not.
Well,
say
in that case, we should say G-D.
We don't say vowels here, okay? We don't say vowels allowed in this household. So Ahab's bad because he doesn't worship the true God. He worships various would have likely been sort of Canaanite pre Hebrew Canaanite gods. One of the big one being Baal, who is the Canaanite thunder god, but like most deities, takes on various roles and various responsibilities and various forms. It's never really always a one-to-one, but essentially it starts out as the thunder god, big boom in the sky. Most human cultures at one point or another have had a sort of a thunder god. You have like Thor bashing giants. That's what thunder is. Fun fact: the word thunder is the English version of the word Thor. So his name is literally Thunder. Thunder gods you find, you have various Native American traditions. You have, at least in certain parts of North America, you have like Thunderbird. Thunder is the sky natural phenomenon as sort of a inspiration for divine thought is very, very common worldwide, practically universal, unless you're a new atheist. Although even if you're a new atheist, you make sacrifices to the weather gods every day, right? What's my carbon output? Are the bananas good enough for me to eat? Do I have to bike to work? So even they're trying to appease the weather at some point. So the point is that Baal is not the true God, right? At least from a monotheist perspective, particularly from Elijah's perspective, who's one of the true prophets of the actual God and who's calling out all the bullshit that's happening in the land. Ahab's together with Jezebel. Jezebel, actually, it's not really used so much anymore, but I do think we need to bring back Jezebel as an insult. It's a great insult to just turn someone's name into an insult is pretty amazing and very Old Testament. So Jezebel is married to Ahab and is like drawing him further and further into degeneracy, right? Like weird stuff that you shouldn't be doing, particularly if you're a Hebrew, right? You have a covenant with the true God, and so anyhow, there's just lots of bad stuff happening. And so the true God speaks to Elijah, or in Hebrew Eliyahu, but we're speaking English, so we'll say Elijah, and says like, hey, you're gonna hide away in like a little river valley, or wadi to use an Arabic term, and ravens are going to feed you, right? They're going to bring you food, and there's going to be water there because there's like a spring, and you're going to hang out there and kind of weather the storm, because for 3 years there's going to be no water. So that's in a semi to full arid region, zero water. In any place, zero water is bad, but particularly in the Near East, zero water is usually a bad thing. Okay.
And I want to
Yeah.
point out too, just for a moment, that throughout the Hebrew, so what's interesting, right, is by the time we're in Christianity, we've got full civilization on the rails for thousands of years and remained civilized for thousands of years, right? And by civilized, I mean like we're talking farming plus, right? So we have various myths, so to speak, or various narrative arcs, I would say, phases of the Old Testament where God is dealing with different versions of the Israelites, right? So, sometimes they're nomadic, sometimes they're slaves, sometimes
Right.
they're, semi-mythical beings like Adam and Eve and all these things, right? But we are firmly grounded in a farming society at this moment.
Yeah. It's what's the line from Walter from Big Lebowski? 6,000 years of history from Moses to Sandy Koufax or whatever the line is. Yeah. Yeah, this is an established agricultural, hierarchical, royal society. And it is interesting because, at least from what I've been gathering from people who are actual biblical scholars, is that it was largely, but not exclusively, but a big part of the push of the Israelites towards the worship of one God, away from polytheism, or to pull out a fancy term, henotheism, belief in many gods, worship of maybe one or two, or some exclusive worship, was sort of a more reorganizing of the society into a more hierarchical structure. So that's interesting. We could maybe come back to that today. We might not have time today. I would like to make this sort of a series. We have so many series on the channel. I know we're very ADD like that, but this is fascinating stuff. But yeah, this is settled. We are no longer wandering through the wilderness for 40 years at this point. And so I guess there's different temptations. I guess there's still temptations, and the temptation to idolatry is still very much there. I know we like to crap on the Calvinists a bit on this channel, but I mean, Calvin's bit about, the heart is a factory of idols. It's kind of true. I mean, that's a broken clock can be right twice a day. So,
that's very Deleuzian of him to think about the heart as being a factory.
well, I think that's sort of, I don't think that's a direct quote, but I forget the actual, yeah, don't, but
I was like, he's the first postmodernist to think about, but anyway,
perhaps. Anyhow, so yeah, and so you have a very hierarchical structure, but you have a very degenerate hierarchical structure here. So there's a divine reset happening, and anybody who's even just taken a cursory look at particularly the Hebrew Bible, from a Christian perspective, I mean, I'm a Christian, I'm going to use more Christian terminology here, just because from an Old Testament perspective, there's a lot of divine resets that keep happening. This is an ongoing cycle of like, God must reset, God must reset, God must reset the thing. And those resets
right.
are not always
super. And God told Noah, build back better.
Exactly. How dare you, sir? Yeah. How did that work though? Noah did some good stuff, I guess, but the rest of them didn't really listen. So a divine reset's happening here. 3 years of drought in an arid to semi-arid region. It's going to kill people. It's going to kill animals. It's going to be really bad. And so that's sort of the larger setting. There's a few other there's a few other narrative bits in chapter 17 of First Kings that we'll sort of skirt for time. Suffice it to say that that Elijah ends up basically challenging, well, you could say challenging Ahab, but in some ways challenging Baal, the pagan god, to a competition about who's God. So Elijah worshiping the Lord, all capital letters, or Ahab with his prophets of Baal, who can light the sacrifice on fire. So they prepare a sacrifice, the same sacrifice, and so Elijah, this is just, it's perfect trolling. I mean, this is Elijah was maybe one of the first trolls. He's like, okay, well, you guys can go first. So he lets them go first, right? And so then it's up to the prophets of Baal to show these people, these worshipers of the true God, amongst the Israelites, what they're all about and how powerful Baal is. And so They do all sorts of crazy stuff. They're like screaming and cutting themselves, and like I just imagine in my head, I'm imagining like Indiana Jones Temple of Doom type level stuff, except that unlike in that scene, there is no Kali Ma heart rip. They themselves are degrading into like they're trying even harder to get Baal to listen. Cutting yourself, cutting off parts of your body. This kind of stuff is seen oftentimes as sort of like it's a blood sacrifice. You're sacrificing part of your blood, right, to get the whatever deity you're talking to listen. They're trying all these things, and they keep getting more and more desperate, and it just doesn't work. And one would imagine that an Old Testament prophet would just sit back and just be like very serene and very like, I'm remembering God's promises, very like quiet Protestant, but no, there are no Protestants, right? Elijah just starts making fun of them, right? So like in verse 27 of chapter, so we're 1 Kings 18:27. It's so good. I'm going to just read it aloud. Another live reading, but it's the Bible, people. We get to read the Bible aloud on this channel. Okay. So Elijah is calling out, right, to the prophets of Baal, quote, cry aloud. Surely he is a god, he here being Baal. Yeah. Either he is meditating, or he has wandered away, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened. So he just mocks them mercilessly. Like these guys are actually harming themselves to try to get their God to listen. And he just is like egging them on, and it doesn't work. Nothing works. The sacrifice is not lit. Okay. Same sacrifice has been set up for Elijah. However, just to make it harder for the sacrifice to be lit, Elijah puts water 3 times on. So three amounts of like, so put some water on the wood to make it harder to light. Put some more. Let's put some more. So 3 times puts water on the wood to make it harder to light. And so Elijah prays to the true Lord, and fire comes down from heaven, whoosh, lights everything on, lights the sacrifice on fire, and consumes the I believe it's a bull, as the bull, I believe. I forgot the animal, apologies. I believe it's a bull. Somebody correct me. The wood and all of the water.
Yeah, it's a bull sacrifice that they chop up and junk. Yeah,
and consumes all the water too. So it's like complete evaporation of water. Everything's burned up. Like super hot fire will, like hot flames will do this. They'll just evaporate water instantly. If you look at like wildfires, that happens all the time.
They call that sublimation. It goes directly from a liquid, or no, sorry, that's a solid too. But anyway, regardless.
Anyhow, that's not. I don't think that's sublimation. My brother in Christ, I don't think that's sublimation, but I might be wrong. Anyhow, okay, so everyone's like, wow, that just happened. Baal is completely delegitimized as a deity. Now, this again, humans are sinful, so there's more. Idolatry is not like eradicated permanently from the land. By the way, we still have much of it today, but the idea is that God is showing everyone how he is real. Everything else is fake, and the prophets of Baal are super cringe. And so people say, quote, the Lord, and again here in the text here in Hebrew, it's the name of God, the true name of the true God, YHWH. The Lord is indeed God. The Lord indeed is God. So the people there are completely convinced. And because it's the Old Testament, and because, if you think about what's happening, right? God via Elijah is doing a divine reset here. And so you're going to have to, perhaps in a modern era, it would be enough to just completely mock people. And I think that is. And I, for one, I will say, do not advocate the use of violence, but, it's a different time, it's a different culture, it's a different place. And Elijah's trying to turn the hearts of many, many stubborn people toward the worship of the true God. And so those prophets are killed. The prophets of Baal are killed. And all of this, by the way, if you're wondering what my background is Mount Carmel. This happens Mount Carmel. Yeah. So this is a picture of Mount Carmel, real place in Israel. So yeah, I've doubtless left some stuff out, and it's very quick. But the story itself, right? Please go read. Many good, audiobook readings of the Bible. This is not a live reading channel per se. I want to talk about it, but that's essentially what goes down. Elliott, have I forgotten anything that's important? It was a speed run.
That's pretty much it. I would say. I would say the other thing is that did you covered the part of Ahab, right, where he's trying to go petition Ahab about like, hey man, you really need to listen to me because like I'm the guy.
I forgot about that. Yes, yeah, I skirted that. Thank you. No, yeah, there is. This is Elijah does try to kind of he tries to not push it to this level. So
right, like basically he's like, hey Ahab, he starts out. So, and I think it's important because this, I'll say this story actually has personal resonance with me because it's sort of one of those stories where if you transition from Christianity to atheism for a little while, right, or whatever, you're an atheist arguing against a Christian. This is actually, particularly if your version of atheism is scientific materialism. So like think atheism plus back in the day, or wokes are actually not scientific materialists. They're not scientific, nor are they materialists.
That's very true.
To be very clear, they're atheists, but they are much more kind of bizarro Gnostic, bizarro hermeticists. Like anyway, they're Hegelian. They're not anyway. But point being is that so if you're like the kind of the Bill Nye, well, used to be Bill Nye. Anyway, point being is that if you're a scientific materialist, you're going to bring this story up as like, hey, actually there is historic precedent in your Bible for the scientific method, right? Because Elisha went up and certainly did what you're doing to me right now, which he went up to Ahab and said, hey, bad shit's going to happen if we don't turn towards God, right? And Ahab said, pound sand, I don't care about you, right? And what's your God done anyway, right? Right. And then he goes and he's like, okay, let's conduct a scientific experiment, right? And I think this is a fair question for a lot of modern Christians of like, hey, why don't you conduct the experiment? What are you afraid of? Elisha wasn't afraid. Where's your faith, bro? And I don't mean that in like a gotcha atheist type of way. I say, hey, actually though, where's your faith? Like what? You don't think like is God is actively choosing not to intervene in material right now? And at what point did he choose to withdraw? And I think these are things that a lot of thoughtful Christians think about. And I think there are answers to it, but this story does evoke that question.
C.S. Lewis wrote a whole book about this. That's actually pretty good.
Exactly.
Miracles. Yeah, it's pretty good. But
right. So this is a miracle.
It's a valid question.
Miracle, right?
Yes.
And yeah. So I this story like sticks out in my mind as like an actually pretty important story. And Elisha, of course, is a really important prophet, right? Like
Elijah.
Sorry, not Elisha. You're right.
Yeah, let's be very careful.
You're right.
Because there's Elisha who comes after him, so it's confusing. Yeah, at least to those of us who don't speak biblical Hebrew, right? For ancient Hebrew speakers, it would have been the difference is very clear, but not for
You misgendered me. You dead named me.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, no, it's a valid question. I mean, I guess it's the scientific method. This is interesting. This is why I like talking to you. That I would have not thought about that at all. But yeah, no, that's an interesting point. It's I'll have to continue to think about that one, whether I buy that one or not. But yeah, so again, objective spiritual reality aside, and regardless of what any of us or any of the people watching, believe, the story still says it has something to say and it has something to tell us, like most stories that have lasted the test of time, right? They last the test of time for a reason. Again, even on a materialist level, although I hate to go down to that, but there's probably a reason people still tell the stories, right? There's probably something about them. I for one am somebody who believes, yeah, this is what happened, and it's not just a great story. This is like a sacred story for me, and for many others. But again, I understand that I'm talking to a mixed group, and that's fine. You can read just because I hold this story to be scripture doesn't mean that it also doesn't have symbolic resonance. Of course it does, right? Like if a story that's not quite at the level of scripture, for me at least, still has a lot of meaning, like Lord of the Rings, right? Why wouldn't scripture have even more symbolic or mythic resonance? Of course it did. Of course it does. I don't know. I think this story, it's great because you get to see a fancy dude in the Bible not be nice, because being a person of faith is not about being a nice person. This is a complete bastardization of any sort of Abrahamic tradition. It's not about being a nice person. It's about being a good person, which is not the same thing as being a nice person, first and foremost. And I guess I'm calling myself out here. I'm part of a tradition, Lutherans, that are very nice. And I'm not against being nice. I think you should be nice. My point is not to not be nice. My point is that being nice is not the highest good, right? Right. Of course you shouldn't.
Saving people from starving to death is a pretty good.
It's a bigger good. And if the one thing keeping people from eating is the fact that, they refuse to acknowledge who literally feeds them, right? If you're a person of an Abrahamic faith, then it is God. He feeds you, right? He feeds all creation. He keeps it going. Like, it's literally him. So do you like to eat? Well, maybe you should recognize who's feeding you, right? First and foremost, it's not Baal. It's not, oh, I'm so smart. It's not, oh, I'm so great and I'm so intelligent. I mean, all those things are probably true, right? But it's ultimately where do all those things come from? It comes from God. So acknowledge whence the goodness of the world originates, first and foremost. And yeah, like, and when you don't do that, society starves. And whether that's literally true, no water, no food, that's bad. It can also be metaphorically, or let's say spiritually true, because metaphor also gets misused a bit in our current postmodern age, let's say. Spiritually, that can still, like, you were not being fed, right? You have a 3-year drought. That's a problem. A 3-year drought of any sort of substantial spiritual food. That is a kind
and a 3-year.
That's a
3-year drought, specifically because they kind of threw off the old ways, and Jordan Peterson talks about this. So this is kind of a cold take at this point.
Yeah, this is not hot. This is JP's done a lot of it, but yeah.
But it has aged well, in my opinion. Which is to say, look,
it was around before Jordan Peterson. Believe it or not.
No. I don't mean this story, but I mean the take I'm about to give, right? Okay, which is to say that what we're talking about here is, like, by the time of Elijah, right? The children of Israel had been churning for many, many kings, right? Like they'd been grooving. They had the law, right? It wasn't a confusing point. Like they'd had plenty of reps with the law and whatnot, and now they had turned away from it, right? And Elisha is as I think Collin was wanting to say here a little bit later, but I'll kind of point it out. Is like this is sort of our first foray potentially into talking about monotheism and henotheism and other types of theism, right?
Let's say one of the first. So this is a theory that I'm working on, and I bet you know what? I'm almost 100% certain that this is independent invention. Somebody has probably already said this. I'm doing a deep dive through scholarly sources right now. So if any of you in the comments can point me in the right direction, please. I am not claiming this is my independent original thought. I'm just saying this is something that I've been coming to in my own deliberations. So I'm not claiming anything here. Okay, now you can see I'm being painfully.
No, for sure.
I'm being painfully right. Oh, I don't want to. Yeah. Okay.
So litigious, right? So German. But no, I mean, before I get to that point, though, I just wanted to real quick say, which is just to say that, the children turned from a tradition that was working, right? And they forgot sort of where that source was, so even if you don't necessarily take the direct literal, which I'm fine with, right? But of that God is sustaining us. It's like, well, what is God? God is the highest good, right? And when you have misaligned from the highest good, it might cause a 3-year drought, right? Or more. And think about a 3-year drought, right? Is that you could survive one drought pretty much without too much issue if you're a good farmer back in the day. But 2 years, you're starting to break into your like reserve seeds, right? Like in 3 years, it's like you're going to have a hard time getting going again, right? Like you may not be able to actually revitalize your society at that point.
And Elliott, you know what I just thought? I did not plan this, but we're coming out of a 3-year drought of another kind, a 3-year kind of period where people were not allowed to, where people were oppressed for their beliefs, and where people were not allowed to do the things that their God-given, to exercise their God-given liberties. And people were not, people were encouraged to do things that were contrary, or in some cases coerced into doing things that were very contrary to their beliefs. So,
and are now being encouraged to worship false idols and whatnot, right?
Yep. So there's stories. The good stories stick around for a reason, right? That's that. Yeah. No, my not to make it all about my thoughts, but I do think, there's this interest. Many people, Mark Smith is one of the ones that comes to mind, who've built whole academic careers talking about how, in the Hebrew Bible, you see a progression and change. Why wouldn't you? It's, it spans hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and obviously no tradition is static. Tradition is important. We are pro-tradition on this channel, but no tradition is completely static. That is just not a thing. That does not, to be truly extropic, you have to move. You just have to move opposite of entropy. Earlier stages of Israelite religion were far more monolatrous than monotheistic, which means, so monolatry is the worship of one God. It does not necessarily mean, though, that other gods aren't real. It means that you reject them and you worship them, or rather you reject them and don't worship them, and you worship the one God that you follow. One of the big problems with how modern Christians, particularly evangelicals, God bless you, and the rest of us have to explain ourselves all the time for you. Because we're
actually more importantly, God heap many, many blessings upon you and bless you into not believing your crazy shit anymore.
Yeah. So, it's very tempting, particularly from a modern American evangelical perspective, to read monotheism onto the Hebrew Bible because, the Jewish people are God's people, and they're the people of the book, and they're monotheists. And in some ways, I mean, that's all true. But, I guess the point is that saying we worship one God and he's the real God does not necessarily mean that other gods aren't sort of out there, right? That's different. That's monolatry. That's different than monotheism, which says, and those other gods are fake, or maybe just demons, or demons pretending to be God, but they're not real, right?
And this is where like
different statements. Right.
This has all sorts of like very like I don't even get it from like a formation perspective, right? Because it has like some pretty look, the thing is that I think that atheism is called by Christians unnecessarily lying to their children, and I think that monotheism or pretending like monotheism was the only thing in the Old Testament is one of those lies that causes atheism. I genuinely think so.
Maybe, but my point here isn't that monotheism doesn't exist in the Hebrew Bible. It clearly does. And my point is also not that there is no monolatry in the Hebrew Bible. There clearly is. The point is that there's a transition over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years. And so the understanding of who God really is changes, because from a believer's perspective, at least from a Christian perspective, I need to check with my Jewish friends and get their take on this, because I'm certain they're going to have a very different interpretation. And as the saying says, zwei Jiden, drei Meinungen, as they say in Yiddish, So there's various opinions going on there, different interpretations. But from a Christian perspective, this is easily accounted for by saying, well, God is continually revealing himself, as in Revelation, a revealing over time in different ways and in different places, and that God's chosen people learn more about him as they're put through more trials and as they grow in faith, as they stumble in faith, as there are prophets that are sent to them that reveal more things. But yeah, with Elijah, I'm not going to say he's the first monotheist, but I think this story is very monotheistic to me and not monolatrist. Elijah is competing with the prophets of a false god, and Baal in the story here is clearly not happening. Baal's not doing anything. Baal is not intervening in any way. Baal doesn't exist in this story. He only exists in the minds of these severely addled and degenerate prophets and the people who follow, right? Other people who follow the Baal cult. But it's not like the Lord is fighting in some spiritual battle with Baal. Baal's just not there. Only God is. That, to me, strikes me as a very monotheistic thing. That's a very monotheistic story. Compare Moses. Moses is competing with the let's call them magical advisors of Pharaoh, right? And they're engaged in sort of almost a magical competition, if you will, or a spiritual competition, whose staff can turn into snakes and stuff like that, right? That in Exodus, it's still very clear that the God of the Hebrews is very much in control, but there's more tension, there's more overt spiritual happenings that show this contention between the two forces, if you will.
Like to put it like succinctly, in Moses there is actually a wizard duel happening. In this case, the other side didn't even show up with like any magic.
Yeah, they just cut themselves and went nuts. Cutting yourself apart, going nuts might be happening today. You can fill in the blanks. Yeah. And
yet the God of nihilism does not show up. Interesting.
And the God of nihilism does not show up. Right. So, and I think that's also, I think that's why, at least personally, why I love this story so much, because Elijah is such a baller. He's such a badass, and he's just snarky. He doesn't Elijah takes God so seriously that he doesn't take false gods seriously at all. And Elijah, of course, recognizes that the worship of Baal and Asherah and other pagan deities is a big problem. You shouldn't do it. But he also recognizes that they're not real. They don't provide food. They don't feed the people. They don't give the law. They don't sustain creation. God does that. And so he takes the whole situation so seriously that he doesn't need to take them seriously. And I think, I would that I had a fraction of that kind of faith. This is why, people of all three Abrahamic faiths hold up Elijah as one of the dudes to emulate, because he's a person of incredible faith, but also it's one of my favorites because he mocks them. The story gives you permission as a person of faith to mock people who hold ridiculous, insane, destructive beliefs. Because you should. What, you want people out there cutting themselves, running around acting nuts, thinking that it'll change the weather or something like that? That doesn't change the weather. You could, from a scientific or more materialist perspective, you could say, well, okay, the weather is complex and there's lots of factors, and yeah, that's also true. But I mean, if you're somebody of faith, and even if you're not somebody who's, maybe you're not convinced, or you just like story, you like these kinds of stories for maybe something else, there's still something powerful about that okay, but like you said before, Elliott, where does good come from, right? Okay, you might have difference of opinions about where good comes from, but if you hold that there is something called good, and you see things around you that are not really good, okay, well, why are we, you should probably be mocking these people and showing them, not just to mock, just to have fun, although, everyone likes memes are great, but mocking them in such a way that delegitimizes them, maybe in the eyes of others, but it's really hard to convince people through, it's hard to convince somebody who's really like the prophets of Baal are not convinced that the Lord is the true God by Elijah's mocking, right? They're convinced that the Lord is the true God by the fire coming down from heaven and lighting the sacrifice on fire, which is to say that God is going to prove himself to people. And that's God's task. Elijah is just there setting it up. And then, you could ask, well, then if it's really God doing this, then why is Elijah mocking them at all? Lots of different probably interpretations you could have for that. But I think, this is just me. This is my Lutheran midrash. Bear with me. My Lutheran midrash is that Elijah isn't really talking to the prophets of Baal here when he's mocking them. He's talking to the kind of undecided people in the middle, right? Because if the Israelites are coming at it, are transitioning, a slow process of transitioning from a period where you could have multiple gods, and maybe different families followed particular ones, to there is only one God. Well, those undecided middle people, those are the people that Elijah is trying to reach. So that's what mocking does. It's not going to convince the hardcore believers. They're already out there cutting themselves going nuts. You can't do that. But there's a lot of people, quote unquote, normal people who get sort of derided. Normies, we make fun of normies, but normies are actually kind of the people you want. You want to get the normies with you. And I think that that's also why I love this story so much, is it gives people of conviction permission to mock insane people, to prove to the normies that the insane shit doesn't work, and it's not going to help them, and it's just going to result in more problems. So I pass it to you, Elliott. That was my brief, not so brief midrash on this story, but I think it holds. I'd be curious in your take on that.
No, I think that the mockery is appropriate, right? And I think also, like, it's not just normies, it's a leader, right? Like, so in this case, it's not even clear that the normies were the degenerate ones. Like, we actually do see called out in other stories that, like, the individual, like, Israelites started turning to false gods. We see this in a couple of different passages. Obviously, the most famous one that everybody can think about is the golden calf, right, with Moses and all that junk. But another one that's less common is, like, there's admonitions for Israelites not to use amulets and junk, and it's like, well, hold on, like, you don't ban things that people are not doing. Like, that's ridiculous, right? And obviously, some of the Israelites, and I can't remember if this is before Elijah, right? But some of the Israelites clearly thought that these amulets were effective, otherwise they wouldn't be using them, which means that there was other magical traditions and other gods, through whom you could make amulets, right?
Yeah, and in this story, I kind of glossed over it, but I'm going to bring him up because it pertains exactly to what you just said. There's Obadiah, right? Obadiah works for Ahab. He's part of the royal retinue, or whatever cohort, like the royal household, I guess you'd say. The exact term, somebody will correct me. Obadiah. So you'd think, if you were a terminally online right-wing person, you'd be like, oh, look at this horrible, Obadiah. Okay, but what Obadiah is doing? Obadiah gets paid by the king. Obadiah is so bad. Obadiah is hiding like 100 prophets who are loyal to the Lord and feeding them and giving them water throughout, likely from the king's stores. Awesome, by the way. Throughout the very based, throughout the drought. So this story is not like hyper. The story in some ways, or at least Obadiah, perhaps stands in. This is getting very midrashi. I love this. Obadiah maybe is sort of a stand-in for the normies in a way. Normies who are trying to be good but are terrified, because to be fair, like, if a king says you worship this god, if you don't worship that god, bad things might happen to you, right? But Obadiah still secretly, the story also gives permission to people like Obadiah to secretly, go out of your way to ensure that goodness is allowed to survive through periods of drought, through periods of both, maybe physical, but also more spiritual drought. So yeah, the Obadiahs of the world, that you don't want to alienate the Obadiahs. The Elijahs need the Obadiahs, and vice versa. I guess it's also what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, like not every not every person who appears to be blue pilled is in fact blue pilled, right?
Right.
Like the, yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And so while the story has a very sharp draws a very sharp distinction, literally, between the everyone else and then the diehard prophets of Baal, it's not lumping. Elijah's not saying, if you don't do exactly what I'm doing right now, all y'all are going to be killed. The people who are punished in the story are the prophets of Baal, the diehard followers of the pagan god. And again, we're not advocating for any violence or anything like that, but the story is interesting in that the harsh punishment is reserved for the diehard followers. It's not for the normies. It's not for the people in the middle. It's another reason too, where you can tell, I think I can pretty conclusively say from what I've been reading and from logical inference that, at the time that the story was written, or at least at the time that the story is purporting to talk about, there was still a lot of undecided middles, in amongst the Israelites. Who do we worship really, right? There was still sort of an ironing out of who is our God and how does that all work out. So in the story, God's not throwing the people in the middle away, right? He's not doing that. So I think there's also it's in some ways it's a very metal story and very extreme, but there's also a lot of to use some more Christian terminology. There's grace in there too, right? That there's God is meeting people and resetting things in a way to help them recognize that He's the one who's actually going to feeds them, and He's the one who's going to, spoiler, with Elijah's participation, but God is the one who turns around the drought, and then the clouds come off the sea, and then they get rain. So, yeah. So it's not a anti-normie story. I think it's about, it's all about reaching out to the people, the normies, reaching out to them, because like you said, like Obadiah, not all of them are necessarily as far gone as you think, and maybe some of them are pretty based. You just don't see it. So
some things are hidden or
yeah,
occult, as some of us like to say.
dude.
But no,
This is my show, sir. No, it's fine. This is our show. Yeah,
our show. Right?
It's our show.
No. In terms of the whatever, of course, I'm not that concerned. But essentially, so here's a fun little thing, and this is not cringy occult stuff. Although all of my occultism comes directly from Jews, right? I'm a Kabbalist, right? Or I identify as a Kabbalist anyway. Like I get, insofar as I'm a Hermeticist, like,
I'm not
Western.
I'm not laughing at that. It's just anytime now anyone says I identify as, I have to just, it's hard not to laugh because it's become
No.
yeah.
Exactly. It's as intended. You should mock those who, but yeah. But point being is that I definitely study some Kabbalistic stuff. So I won't get into numerology too hardcore, but a lot of these, when I was growing up as a kid, a lot of these biblical numbers were just really confusing to me. You're like, okay, 450 prophets of Baal, 400 prophets of Asherah. The fuck is going on with these numbers? You're like, what? You're just telling me that it's like, it's not 452 or 367? Like, no, it was 450 and 400. Because look, I'm like, okay, round numbers, fine, 400.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know why it's 500 then. But then you give me the 450, so I have 2 sig figs, which just makes me assume it's 3 sig figs. So why do we care? And then, of course, I'm referring exactly to verses 17 or 18 and 19, right? Okay. Which is where Elisha says, Elisha makes it very clear: I am one prophet. There's one me versus 450 Baals and 400 Asherahs, right? So back in the day, we didn't have separate numeral and letter systems, which is super old news to almost probably everybody, right? But the Hebrew alphabet is based
on... Our numbers come from India. which is
Right.
base 10. It's a different way of doing things. So yeah,
Right, as per along through the Arabs, which is why we call them Arabic numerals,
they're
because
actually Indian.
Fibonacci brought them from they said originally India. They stole it from India. It turns out everything's from India at the end of the day. But anyway, point being is that Hebrew, the Hebrew alphabet, came from originally a lot of different alphabets. There's Phoenician, there's Aramaic, there's Phoenician, but originally there seems to be that there's this Proto-Sinaitic slash hieroglyphic situation. So every Hebrew letter has a picture behind it, right? So Aleph is a picture of a bull. It's got kind of funky over the years, but it literally looks like a sideways A, Aleph, right? Crazy shit turns out. But it's like at the Aramaic step is where it got a little bit weird relative to what we see here. So 1 is Aleph, which is a bull. Interesting there, right? And then 400 is Tau, or sorry, not Tau. Tav,
Yeah.
right? Which is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet as it is currently right now. I'm not sure about historically, but it historically stands for a cross. Fascinating, right? And then 450 is Tav plus 50, which hold on, I'm looking that one up again. Sorry, which is Noon, the letter N, right?
Yeah.
Noon, which is the same Arabic letter Noon, which stands in for a snake, right? So then you have a cross. So Baal, literally, the number of the prophets of Baal is the same as a Tav, Noon, which is a cross and a snake. I mean, it kind of gets a little bit funky when you look at it, because Christ is usually seen as the serpent on the snake, or like we see a healing thing, just like
up in the wilderness. Yeah.
So it's interesting that those sorts of connections are there. Now you could say, Elliott, that's like a weirdo approach. I'm like, well, I don't know how weird it is, because these sorts of Kabbalistic, cross artistic riffing things are things that actually these books have had in them for thousands and thousands of years. Elijah, the name Elijah literally means Yahweh is my God, right? So I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, really? You're telling me that this dude's mom named him that? Or maybe, and of course, this is, maybe like he had some other name who nobody gives a shit about anymore, because he made his name through this, right?
Right. Like, well, and it could, yeah. I mean, the Yahwist, there was the competition, right? There was a competition for a while. Like, so you had the Yahwist camp, you had the Elohist camp, and other camps.
Yep.
So
within Israel, by the way, right? And they were referring to the same dude. And by the way, the northern.
Well, that's were they referring to? That's a topic for another day. When we talk about,
but we do see Elohim, right? Like,
when we talk about Genesis, we should talk about that. Yeah.
Well, this is more fun to come. This is a precursor of the biblical scholarship, obviously. But the point being is that, like, the ox or the bull or the aleph, right? Or in this case, fucking Elisha, right? Well, an ox or a bull is it's interesting that they're sacrificing the bull in this case. I'm not necessarily drawing any conclusions, but all I'm saying here is, if you haven't thought about the Bible in this way, every time you see a number, go just look up what the Hebrew relations for that, because, or start thinking Adam, right? And start looking at like the sum of the letters, right? What numbers do these all mean? And if you think I'm crazy, look at Nero, right? What's the in Revelations, they straight up say the number of the beast is 666, or in some manuscripts 616. Well, what is 666 in Greek? Nero, it turns out, right? So this sort of encoding, it turns out the text is very rich, right? So anyway, just kind of
No, and as you quite rightly point out, it's been a big part of Jewish mysticism, and to a certain extent Christian mysticism for a while, right? Obviously Christians get it honestly from the earlier tradition.
Yep.
Yeah. It's not I think it's fascinating. It's cool that you're the one doing that. I mean, for me, this is not normally how I go about it's not my normal biblical hermeneutic. Lutherans don't tend to get obsessed with the numbers quite so much. Perhaps we're too early modern. We're stuck in the early modern period too much, maybe. I don't know. But it is interesting. Yeah. It's all
well,
very...
and the main reason why I bring it up is just so that, I mean, because I think the early modern approach is worthwhile. Thinking about like the textual literary themes, right? And like really applying the meta narrative to our life, which is totally, I think, appropriate and a useful, fruitful thing. It was just always interesting because I would always bump on this as a kid. I'm like, damn, why didn't you just say they were many or outnumbered him? Because that's sometimes what the Bible does too. It was like they were numerous, right? So numerous that, and they'll use a metaphor or whatever, right? But it's like, no, you were very specific. And I'm like, what does that mean? And now I'm like, oh, okay, we have an idea of what that might mean. And I don't know this super well, but maybe Baal was associated with crosses or something. I don't know. Probably not. I think he was associated with bulls as well, right? I have
yet to come across any sort of. I mean, he's definitely connected to storms, big time. But yeah, I have yet to come across any sort of cross connection. So,
yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of just as a because another important number here is that both times in both the beginning and the end, right? It's 3 years. Elijah has to petition Ahab 3 times, right? They pour the water 3 times, right? Like there's these sorts of things that are important from a literary perspective, and that doesn't even necessarily, in my mind, you don't have to be scared by literariness, because if you actually do think that God is writing the universe as we speak, why wouldn't he write in literary structure in the universe? Like you would expect this to happen. So if you think this is a real event, there's no worries. If you think that maybe it was recorded, maybe it happened 4 or 3 2, but they recorded it as 3-3 just because it's interesting. Either way, I don't really care. It's just worthwhile noticing, right, that there's 3 3s there. And seeing these sorts of patterns is fun for me in biblical scholarship.
Yeah. No, it's neat. It's one of the greatest. It's one of the cool things too about the Hebrew Bible is how much of the sort of the numerology is stuck in there. I don't know much about that, but I've read little bits of like, particularly again when you have a writing system where the letters are also numbers, you can do some cool stuff. We don't have that in English, so we just don't have that. Maybe it's a downside of writing vowels. Maybe that's a downside of writing vowels, is that you lose the math. And I know that, Elliott, you're all about the math, so I'm not surprised you would go there.
And turns out vowels are degeneracy. John's all the
turns out vowels are degenerate. That would be a topic for another day. We might be able to have a conversation about that. Are vowels degenerate? At least writing vowels. Yeah. Cool. I think that's probably a pretty good place to end it. I do recommend people read it. And again, it's not just mocking for mocking's sake. It's mocking people who do horrific things and showing the normies that how bad, but also how just like at the end, when stripped of their power, when put to the test, how weak they are. I think that's also a takeaway too, is that that it doesn't mean they don't do damage or they don't do harm. Clearly they do, but in the end, they're weak. And so there's a white pill in there. Elliott, anything to let people know about, other projects, things? You don't have to, but I always just try to give space for that at the end of episodes.
Oh, make space. Yes, of course. No, I appreciate it.
What?
It's a safe space for plugs.
It is not a safe space. Yeah.
No, but no, nothing right now. I mean, I'm actually pretty excited about this embarking on henotheism it broadly, and more specifically sort of some of the other themes that we've got coming down the pike are related to henotheism.
Yeah, I mean, I did not write a dissertation on biblical henotheism, but I did write a dissertation on henotheism from a religious perspective. So at least for one particular historical instance of it. So it's something I've actually read a fair amount about, and I'm getting back into. And so, yeah, this is the perfect vessel for it. Thank you, Elliott, for being on board for that. Thank you to everyone who's watching. We love, I believe it is now, at least at the time of recording, 49 subscribers. So thank you for that. That is far more than I would ever thought anyone would ever want to listen to us ramble and be crazy. So awesome. It's in some, and maybe this is a cope, maybe it is a cope, but in some ways it's kind of nice having a smaller, it's not like 2, but it's not like 12,000, right? There's 49 and there's almost 50. Maybe Elliott can do some sort of numerological business on that. It's kind of a nicer, maybe perhaps more intimate group, and that's kind of cool. So please keep liking, subscribing, all the things. Let us know if you have thoughts, opinions, feelings, disagreements, things like that. I should have a new blog post up on carpeforum.com soon. The issues with me having my car vandalized, unfortunately, have sapped a lot of my time. But soon it will be up. It's about the friend-enemy distinction. Everyone's talking about that these days, but I like to think I have my own particular take on it. And so I'll let people know on the channel here too when that drops. And until then, everyone, enjoy spring. Spring is sprung, spring is here. It's Easter for some of us, Passover's ending for others of us, and it's a cool time. All right. Take it easy.
And Easter is yet to come for our Ortho Bros.
Oh yes, the Ortho Bros. Well, the Ortho Bros are ending. Thank you. The Ortho Bros are entering into the very end of Lent. So yeah, I always forget. Different calendars. Anyhow, it's fine. So it's almost Easter.
Yeah, why can't they just be Orthodox?
You said it, not me. All right. All right. Peace, everyone. See ya. Bye.
Bye.